everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. It is officially 12:10. So we are going to go ahead and get started with this webinar. My name, of course, is Thad Graham. I'm the education specialist with Family Services Incorporated for the Victim Services Program. Today we are going to be looking at the link between domestic violence and suicide. I also just want to give you a little disclaimer. I am working from home today, so if you hear me yell at a cat or a child randomly walks in, I am sorry. They have been COVID quarantined. So yes, let's go ahead and get started. And I apologize ahead of time, just in case. You never know. So of course, our mission here at Family Services is to provide resources to build healthier relationships and to promote personal growth. Our vision is to engage with the communities to meet the needs of their most vulnerable members. And last but not least, a trigger warning. I do want to let everybody know we are going to be talking about specifically domestic violence and suicide and the link between. So in case this is triggering, please make sure you take your own mental health and take that as the most important thing when it comes to discussing these topics. So let's go ahead and get started. What are our objectives for today? So today we are going to be defining domestic violence and its synonyms. We are going to discuss the link between mental health and domestic violence. We are going to discuss the impacts that domestic violence has on both mental and emotional health. And then we're going to discuss the link between suicide and domestic violence. So to get us started, every 9 seconds, a woman is beaten in the United States. So just in the 2 minutes that we have been together, there have been multiple women who have been assaulted by their domestic partner. Every 40 seconds, a person dies by suicide worldwide. So once again, in the 2 minutes since I've been talking, at least 2 people have statistically been killed by suicide. They have committed suicide. Suicide and intimate partner violence are both major public health crises, and they are closely linked. Yet, despite the clear link, the mental health and intimate partner violence fields have historically worked in isolation. Now, this is from Richard McKeon. He is a PhD and Chief of Suicide Prevention for the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. This is something that we in Blair County have, I think, done a better job than most counties that I've talked to when it comes to this. But it is still something that, of course, we can all work on more. Intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and suicide are very strongly linked, as well as some of the other issues when it comes to mental health. We need to make sure we are doing our part to help victims of domestic violence who are also having mental health issues. So we're going to start today by defining domestic violence. What is domestic violence? Domestic violence is a pattern of coercive behavior used by one person to gain power and/or control over another individual, whether it's an intimate partner or in a familial relationship. Domestic violence, intimate partner violence, any of the words that you can use for it, is about gaining power and control over another individual you have a relationship with, whether that's your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, or even, your mom, your sister, your brother. It doesn't just have to be that intimate relationship. Many terms are used to describe domestic violence. It's referred to as abuse, domestic violence, battery, intimate partner violence, DV, IPV, family, spousal, relationship, or dating violence. You'll hear me use these words and terms interchangeably. We're all talking about the same thing. We're talking about a pattern of coercive behavior used by one person to gain power or control. One of the other things you will hear me say and specifically I will be talking a lot about in this webinar is male abuser and female victim. Now, statistically, that is mostly what we deal with. We deal with, 96% of the time we're dealing with female victim, male abuser. That being said, intimate partner violence can occur and anybody can be the victim. It can be a male, it can be a female with a female perpetrator, it can be a male with a male perpetrator, it can be a female perpetrator with a male victim. Just because I use he or she or describe a man as the perpetrator doesn't mean that it can't happen another way. We also know that domestic violence happens way more than we would like to think about it. It is occurring, according to the CDC, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced physical abuse from an abusive intimate partner. Excuse me. Domestic violence can be characterized by many types of abuse. Any or all of these types of violence and or abuse may occur in a domestic violence situation. Oftentimes, we want to think of domestic violence as, the woman with a black and blue eye who is crying. Domestic violence is way more than just, the black and blue eye with a crying victim. There is no perfect victim, and there is no one type of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. It includes emotional abuse as well as physical violence. It includes stalking, sexual violence, financial abuse, as well as verbal abuse. We actually, myself and our program coordinator, made a short video series that you will see come out on our Facebook that goes through the different types of domestic violence and defines them. We even go into further different types that aren't listed there, including situations like religious abuse. So it's something to keep an eye out for. They're short videos to kind of educate you and make you aware of what domestic violence actually looks like. So if you're not, make sure you follow our Facebook page. Links and information, of course, are at the end of the presentation. Now, whenever we have a discussion about domestic violence, you have to bring into the power and control wheel. This power and control wheel allows us to visually represent how someone is gaining and holding that power and control over another individual. This is the plain Jane, the power and control wheel for, what you would consider, the classic female victim, male perpetrator. So we have things on here like using male privilege, making her like a servant, making all of the big decisions, acting like the master of the castle, acting like the man of the house, being the one to define a man's role and a woman's role. But we have to remember that power and control can occur in multiple different types of relationships. So as much as we use this power and control when it comes to other relationships, excuse me, we have to take into account those as well. For example, the teen power and control wheel. One of the things that most parents of teens overlook is that intimate partner violence in teenagers occur very often. It is one of the most overlooked forms of domestic violence. It is one of the most underreported and one of the most how do I say this, not taken seriously. Oftentimes, we look at it as, oh, they're just teens, they're fine, it's nothing to worry about. But violence among teenagers occurs way more often than we would like to imagine. We're looking at way more than 1 in 4 teens are going to experience some form of intimate partner violence when they start dating as a teenager. In between being a teen and through college, they are going to have some form of physical abuse, emotional abuse, or unfortunately sexual abuse perpetrated on them by someone they love. And also we need to look at the LGBTQ plus power and control wheel, because unfortunately, using privilege when it comes to LGBTQ plus power and control and intimate partner relationships is a little bit different than when you're talking about a heterosexual cisgendered couple. Oftentimes, if, for example, someone is not out to their parents, they can use that, the knowledge of their sexuality, as a tool to hold power and control over that individual. Now, when we look at the link between domestic violence and mental health, I do want to throw this out here. I actually did an entire webinar in August linking between domestic violence and mental health. So some of the information I pulled directly from that presentation. If you would like a further broad spectrum look at the link between domestic violence, mental health, and trauma-informed practices, all of our training can be found on both YouTube as well as on our go-to page. Of course, that information is at the end of the webinar. So on average, more than half of women seen in mental health settings are being or have been abused by an intimate partner. Women who have experienced domestic violence or abuse are at a significantly higher risk of experiencing a range of mental health conditions, including PTSD, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and thoughts of suicide. Now, today we are going to focus on the thoughts of suicide, but I also want to remind you that just because someone is not diagnosed as having depression or anxiety or PTSD does not mean that they are not experiencing those effects. Remember, every person handles trauma differently, and every person reacts from their experiences differently. In situations of domestic violence, an abuser's outburst is commonly followed by remorse and apology. This honeymoon period where they're saying that's never going to happen again, where they're apologizing, they're remorseful for their actions, they're treating this person, like they should. They're treating them with respect. They are, presenting them with gifts. They're trying to make what they did better. Unfortunately, this is just a cycle. This cycle means survivors are constantly anticipating the next outburst. They are constantly in that anxiety of when is it going to flip? When is this honeymoon period going to end? And when am I going to be beaten again? Oftentimes, you'll talk to survivors of domestic violence, and the anticipation was so much worse than the actual physical violence. It was the emotional toll and the anxiety of not knowing what is going to make this person flip and what is going to make this person lash out and abuse or physically harm or sexually harm them. And it could be anything. It could be something as simple as, not cooking the right dinner, or something as simple as, anything could set them off. And is that cycle, that constantly anticipating, that is often worse. Oftentimes victims will say that they would actually do things so that anticipation would be over, so that they could control when they were being abused, so they didn't have to anticipate, when it was going to happen. They would have some control over it. And they could do it maybe when their children were out of the house, when the children were staying at grandma, grandpa's, so that they didn't have to witness that violence as well. Just imagine that, being so anxious about when you are going to be physically or sexually abused that you have the only thing that you can control is when that abuse is going to occur. Not that it is or isn't, but when it's going to occur. And trying to do it so that your children aren't witnesses. Imagine that mental toll. Imagine the toll that would have on someone. Living under such physical and emotional pressure has severe impacts on mental and physical well-being of survivors. When we look at the impacts of mental health, we have difficulty with being productive at work and or school. They may find it difficult to be a caregiver. They may find it difficult to establish and engage in healthy relationships. They may find it difficult to adapt to change. Change is something that will cause a panic reaction for them. And we see this in our survivors all the time. An inability to adapt to change, it really causes them to have an emotional reaction, as well as difficulty in coping with adversity. None of us like change, none of us like adversity, but when we look at victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, they are the ones that have the most difficulty when it comes to adapting to change and coping with adversity. When we look at impacts on emotional and spiritual health, we have low self-esteem and question of self. They often feel hopeless. They feel worthy. They are apprehensive and discouraged about the future. They have an inability to trust. They're questioning and doubting about their spiritual faith, and they're unmotivated. Why would someone who is hopeless, who feels unworthy, who the person that they love is treating them like a piece of crap, why would they feel like there's anything more for them to do or for a reason to stay? You know, when we look at suicide and intimate partner violence, many national reports explore the relationship between intimate partner violence and death at the hands of the abuser. Yes, that is something that we need to look at. It is something that is an unfortunate truth, and it happens here locally. You know, cases of murder suicides are most likely to occur in the context of abuse. They're more likely to occur in the context of an abusive relationship. You know, when we look at stalking and intimate partner violence, if someone is being stalked by a current or former partner, their likelihood of being murdered by that person increases exponentially. That is important. But what is often overlooked is suicide by the victim, them ending their life so that they can get away from that control and take power back into their own hands. Survivors of intimate partner violence have a higher than average rate of suicidal thoughts and tendencies. 23% of survivors admit to having attempted suicide. 3% among those who have not experienced DV. So we have a 20% increase when it comes to survivors of domestic violence having thoughts of suicide or attempting suicide. Survivors of intimate partner violence are twice as likely to attempt suicide multiple times. And women who are sexually abused show a 12 to 20-fold increase in suicide attempts. Younger victims of intimate partner violence were more at risk for suicidality than older victims. Victims that are often overlooked, victims who are often not believed. So we're talking about your, teenagers, your college-age victims, whose parents don't believe them that they're being abused, who don't believe that their 16-year-old daughter is in an abusive relationship. Those younger victims are more at risk for suicidality than older victims. These victims who most people don't believe and don't believe that intimate partner violence is occurring in their relationship are the ones that are more likely to commit suicide. Women who have been victimized and who had a chronic illness or disability are 2.4 times higher. They're 2.4 times at more risk at attempting suicide than someone who does not have a chronic illness or disability. So when we throw in a woman who is being abused, who then has a chronic illness or disability like depression, like anxiety that is brought up on or made worse by their abuse, they are 2.4 times more likely to commit suicide than a victim who is not. Women who had been victims and whose partners had threatened or attempted suicide were also at a greater risk of suicide. So think about this. A woman who is being coerced and manipulated by her spouse or by her intimate partner, them saying, I will kill myself if you don't stay with me. If you leave me, I will kill myself. Or whose partner has attempted suicide, most likely because of that victim trying to leave, are at a greater risk to attempt suicide themselves. When we look at children, child sexual abuse confers a 150% increased risk of later suicidal behaviors. If an individual at risk for suicide because of interpersonal violence, so IPV, does not receive help, the risk of suicide may not abate even after the abuse ends. So if a victim of intimate partner violence, a victim of domestic violence, does not get help, the risk for suicide may not decrease even after they're out of that abusive relationship. This includes exposure to repeated physical or sexual abuse. It also includes psychological and emotional abuse. Remember, it doesn't just have to be that physical or sexual violence. Such abuse may cause the victim to experience depression, hopelessness, and other forms of psychological distress. So what is the link? What is the intersectionality between suicide and intimate partner violence? Research has shown that exposure to violence leads to an increased risk for suicidal behavior in women and children. Now, suicidal behavior includes any behavior that puts a person at risk for death, such as a drug overdose, initiating a car crash, or shooting oneself. Now, this is not the leading factor of completed suicide, but this is a factor that needs to be taken into account. It is something that needs to be looked at and considered. People may also consider suicide when they feel that they do not belong and subsequently lose their sense of meaning. Remember, these victims are feeling alone. They're feeling disconnected. They're isolated from friends and family. When you look back at the power and control wheel, isolation is one of the biggest tools of an abuser. Victims are feeling disconnected. They are isolated from friends and family. They're feeling hopeless. They are feeling lost, and they feel as if no one cares. Why wouldn't they consider suicide when, once again, the person that's supposed to love them beats them, or tells them that they are worthless, or tells them that no one is going to love them? Look at them. Intimate partner violence can cause a weakened personal network, poor social functioning, decreased self-sufficiency. This is one of the other biggest goals of abusers. Financial abuse, preventing someone from being able to take care of themselves financially and beyond. It also is an increased dependence on the abuser, making them rely on the abuser to provide everything for themselves and often their children and family. Humiliation, ridicule, or neglect can deplete self-worth and further drive social isolation. Family conflict and functional impairments may produce a sense of imposing a burden upon others and a perceived lack of purpose. The progression to stronger suicidal ideations results from further loss of connectedness with other people, isolation, social roles, interest, and a sense of meaning in life, as well as a continued feeling of being a burden on their family and on the abuser. Remember, the abuser is telling them that they're worthless. Suicide risk among those reporting domestic violence also may be linked to when this abuse finally comes to light. Remember, someone is not going to most likely report the first time they are abused. You know, they love this person. It was an accident, is what they're told. Remember that cycle of abuse, that honeymoon period after it occurs. When someone is going to report is after a long history of violence. And even then, they may not leave. We know that it'll take a victim up to 11 attempts to finally leave their abuser. And this is the most dangerous time for that person. If they are going to be killed by their abuser, it's most likely going to happen when they attempt or directly after leaving their abuser. This is also when they are the most vulnerable for attempting and committing suicide. Abusers also, once again, may make threats of suicide. They will use this to coerce, control, or frighten the victim. Once again, particularly if the relationship will end. If the abuser is losing power or control over this individual, they will do everything they can to maintain that control over the individual, including attempting to commit suicide, murdering the individual and committing suicide themselves, or even just committing suicide themselves. Remember, if you are working with or you are a victim of domestic violence, you are not responsible for another person's actions, no matter what. Someone who is threatening to kill themselves if you do not stay with them does not love you. Relationships, healthy relationships are built on trust, they're built on love, and they're built on respect. They're not built on coercion, control, fright, and violence. So what can we do? Moving forward, if you or anybody you are working with has thoughts of suicide, please get them help. It has been shown that if we get them help, both mental assistance and help from a victim services program, they're more likely to leave and stay away, and they're also more likely to live a healthier life in the future. Of course, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. You can also text them at 741-741. There's also a list of suicide warning signs here. I also recommend a lot of organizations in our community offer free suicide prevention training and identifying suicide ideations and thoughts. I myself have taken multiple trainings that are local. They are great tools, and I highly recommend that you take one yourself. Like I said before, you can also reach out to us at the Victim Services Program. 814-944-3585 is our helpline. It gives you 24/7 access to an advocate, and of course you can call or text us. Also remember that our FSI Victim Services Program and FSI in general are one of the few programs in the state that offers counseling to our victims, to our survivors. It is often free for the survivor, and it is done in-house. They do not have to go out and find someone. It is an in-house provider who understands what those victims are going through, who has spent way more time counseling individuals of intimate partner violence than honestly I've been alive. It is a great resource for our community and something to remember. Once again, follow us on social media, especially for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We are going to have a lot of great information, a lot of short videos, and other posts about domestic violence and domestic violence awareness all month. Like I said before, all of our videos are recorded and uploaded onto both YouTube and our GoToStage and can be watched at your convenience at any time. Of course, our contact information, and of course, our upcoming webinars. Oh, don't know why that one says September 8th. Must have accidentally flipped. But our next webinar is next Wednesday, the 13th of October. It will, of course, be at 12:10, and it is going to be on litigation abuse. The next webinar is going to be on October 20th, and we are going to answer the question that most people ask: why do victims stay? The last webinar of the month is going to be helping our heroes. We are going to have, and we're going to be hosting a webinar on domestic violence in the veteran population, and this one's going to be a little bit different. As long as everyone's schedules work out, we are actually going to have experts who work with the veteran population here in Blair County and the surroundings, talk about a plethora of different information when it comes to domestic violence in the veteran population, and they will also be open to questions. It'll be a great resource, and I'm pretty excited for it. I said this once before, Women Aware is back. There is a flyer in the handout section. Women Aware is, of course, a free educational support for women who have experienced intimate partner violence. The group is going to meet once a week for about an hour and a half. Members can join at any time. If you have any questions or you know of anybody who could use this resource, please have them call our helpline, 814-944-3585. If they're calling between normal business hours, Brittany will be able to assist them with any information when it comes to Women Aware. If you have any questions, you can happily put them in the question section. If not, thank you everybody for your time. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and I will hope to see you next webinar Wednesday.